where the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is being grilled by the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee on America's troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. Let's take a listen in.
But I think we need to understand that many of us did not support the 2002 campaign to go into Iraq. And one of those reasons was that we wanted to complete the mission in Afghanistan when we had a chance to do it when the Taliban was diminished after our military came in after the attack on our country. But instead, we went into Iraq, which was not engaged in the 9/11 activities, and we never finished Afghanistan, a mistake made by the Bush administration. Now, we've already talked about the Trump administration and setting a deadline and releasing prisoners and moving forward with the reduction of troops when there was really very little options that the administration had. It doesn't negate the information that was made available to you about the strength of the Afghan security forces and the Ghani administration's will to stick with it in Afghanistan. And I think many of us are interested in knowing how intelligence got that so wrong. And the contingency plans are ones that we really do want to review because it seems to us there had to be better ways to secure passage into the airport than what ultimately happened. But considering the hand that you were dealt, considering the crisis that developed, evacuating 124,000 was a miraculous task. So we congratulate all that were involved in the evacuation of so many people under such a short period of time, under such difficult circumstances. I want to get to where we are today. During this process, the State Department was very open to all members of Congress, Democrats, Republicans, as we filtered information into you about vulnerable people in an effort to get them out of Afghanistan. Today, our offices are still being deluged by requests to help people that are in Afghanistan. NGOs are working very aggressively. Can you share with us the process that you're using in order to filter information about Americans that are still in Afghanistan who want to leave, those that apply for SIV status, and those Afghans that are at risk? How do we transmit that information, and what process is in place so that we can try to get these people out of Afghanistan?
Yes, thank you, Senator. As I noted, we've established a task force focused entirely on relocation to help those who wish to leave Afghanistan, whether they're any remaining American citizens, whether it's SIV applicants, whether it's Afghans at risk, whether it's the nationals of partner countries, get out. And that involves a number of things. It involves, for the American citizens, case management teams, 500 individuals whose task is to be in constant contact with any remaining American citizens who wish to leave, and that's what they're doing. It also includes, together with our Legislative Affairs Office, being in constant contact with you, as well as with outside groups who have identified and are trying to help people who seek to leave. This here is the sum total of cases brought to us by members of this committee, just this committee, that all of you, or many of you, have been working, and we are deeply grateful for those efforts, for this information. It ensures that when you send us the information, we put it into our database if it's not already there. We make sure that we're able to track it. We make sure we're able to coordinate with you. And I recognize that especially in the early going, during the evacuation itself, some of the feedback was lacking. We were trying to do all of this in real time, making sure that we took in the information that you were providing and acting on it. And in some cases, we didn't get back to people to say, here's what we've done. And we've been working to make sure that we get back to everyone. I think we had 26,000 inquiries from Congress. We've responded to 21 or 22,000 of them.
So we still have the categories of reporters that work for us that are still in Afghanistan. We have women officials that were officials in Afghanistan that are at risk. We have NGOs that worked with us in Afghanistan, their employees that are at risk. So you're saying we still have an opportunity to work with you to get that information to the sources that you're using to try to arrange for their exit from Afghanistan?
Yes, absolutely, and we very much invite that, and we want to make sure that we have as best possible a unified, coordinated list so that we know what everyone is working on, and we can track and we can help or we can take on depending on the.
And can I get your best guess on the numbers at one point?
While we continue to monitor those proceedings at the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, where Antony Blinken continues to defend the American troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, with us is our correspondent Susan Teherani from New York. Susan, once again, while the Biden administration has taken a rather convenient stance, continuing to slam the Trump-era deal for the mess in Afghanistan, the fact of the matter is, while other Trump deals were modified, this one could have been altered as well. And the execution of the withdrawal was in Joe Biden's hands, and it turned out to be a messy one, to say the least.
Absolutely, and we're really seeing the Republicans take a clear stance on this issue. And when Antony Blinken yesterday at the congressional hearing said that we inherited a timeline, not a plan, that was something that the Republicans took an issue with. But ultimately, it goes back to what you're saying, Molly. You know, it could work both ways. First of all, the Biden administration has not been shy in reversing any of the Trump plans, whether domestic or international. If it had any problems with any of the measures in this so-called withdrawal plan from Afghanistan with the Taliban, it could have gone ahead and done that, let alone Antony Blinken coming out and saying that we didn't inherit a plan, meaning in some case that instance that they basically drew their own disastrous plan, which led to where we are right now. And we're really seeing the Republicans hammer out at not only the evacuation process, but what they called a surrender by the Biden administration, betrayal of U.S. troops, and yesterday during the congressional hearing, time and again, calling on Antony Blinken to even resign. Today, what we're hearing is a hammering out on whether or not Joe Biden is even fit to be commander-in-chief, and if he's making his own decisions, who's pulling the strings, and whether or not it's a puppeteer show. So let's take a listen in a little more, and we'll try to get to that as well.
We have been listening into those proceedings that have also touched upon the at-risk Afghans. Let's go back to the proceedings at the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee.
There was no indication that there would be a rapid collapse of the Afghan army and government. For much of last year, I was the acting chairman of intelligence. I'm now the vice chairman of intelligence. I've been tracking this very, very closely. And just going back to the beginning of this year, obviously I can't quote the titles of the pieces, but let me suffice it to say that there are numerous pieces that would be categorized as it's going to hit the fan. And but let's just for a moment put that aside, okay? Because I think any analysis of those pieces would have led anyone to that conclusion. Putting that aside for a moment, we had every reason to believe and to plan for the rapid collapse of the Afghan military and the Afghan government. At the beginning of 2020, by all admissions, we had already really bad status quo in Afghanistan. Okay, we had a small footprint, but we had a strong commitment to air support. And that sustained the Afghan security forces' ability to resist the Taliban. The security forces of Afghanistan were suffering 10,000 casualties a year. The Taliban was suffering casualties too, but they enjoyed safe haven in Pakistan. They were able to go there to rest, to refit, to train, to recruit. And so in summary, even before the withdrawal, we had a terrible status quo. The security forces, a small number of U.S. forces, continued to die. We had U.S. losses as well. I want to mention that. But the Afghan government was still fractious and corrupt. And the Taliban had an unchallenged safe haven in Pakistan. Or put another way, in paraphrasing your own words from your opening statement, if after 20 years and hundreds of billions of dollars in support, equipment, and training, there's not enough for the Afghan government or the Afghan security forces to become more resilient or self-sustaining, what did we think was going to happen as that support began to be removed? What did we think was going to happen when that terrible status quo was changed? It doesn't take some exquisite piece of intelligence or some brilliant analysis to conclude that if you radically change an already bad status quo, by removing U.S. and NATO forces, by ending enablers and air support, the status quo was going to collapse in favor of the Taliban. This is not an argument in favor of staying. I think that ship has sailed, okay? Because I know a lot of time has been spent on justifying the withdrawal. We're not debating the withdrawal. What I'm arguing is we had a terrible status quo as is, by your own admission. The Afghan government, even after billions of dollars in 20 years, was not self-sustaining, was not resilient. We should have known that as we began to draw down support, we were going to see the potential for a collapse. And that's what all these pieces pointed to as well. So it's concerning that no one saw all of this and concluded that there was no evidence or no reason to believe that there could be a rapid collapse. More to that point, we began to see clear signs weeks ago that this is where it was headed. Without airstrikes, the Taliban now began to mass and maneuver, going from intimidating these small Afghan outposts to actually getting them into quitting. We were seeing Afghan outposts begin to quit. The Taliban they went from surrounding these small provincial capitals to surrounding major cities with 5,000 to 8,000 Taliban fighters. This is weeks before. By the way, this is at the same time as I believe on July 8th, President Biden was still giving this naive, optimistic prediction about the fighting capabilities of the Afghan forces and so forth. We could see them meticulously focused on the north. You could see that they were methodically and carefully splintering the sclerotic remains of any sort of resistance. Weeks before the fall of Kabul, you could see the Taliban was on the verge, was headed towards doing something they hadn't done before. They were going to isolate Kabul from the north, cutting off all their supply routes. So we knew weeks before that we were headed for a Taliban control of the north. All the traditional routes of Taliban encroachment on Kabul were nearly sealed, the south and the east. Kabul faced the prospect of no fuel. The Afghan government faced the prospect of being unable to mount any viable opposition and sustain defense. What did we think was going to happen? All of those things were in place at the time. And I think the most concerning part of it is that if we didn't have an analysis that looked at all this, this wasn't a failure of intelligence. This was a failure of policy and planning. We have the wrong people analyzing this. Someone didn't see this. Either someone didn't see this or someone didn't want to see this because we had established this. We wanted to be out by September 11th so that we could have some ceremony arguing that we got and pulled out of Afghanistan on the anniversary of 9/11. The fact of the matter is where it leaves us now, on top of all the other things that have been mentioned here from a geopolitical perspective, is not a good place. I think China and Russia and Iran, they look at this botched withdrawal and what they see is incompetence that they think they might be able to exploit, may lead to miscalculation. I think the Europeans, our allies, who had very little say of any, or control certainly, over the timing and the execution of all this, they're now, number one, have to be wondering about our reliability, the credibility of our defense agreements with them, but they also have to be really, really upset at the prospects of a massive refugee crisis landing right on their borders here very soon. And India, and I know that there was an announcement today, there'll be a meeting of the Quad fairly soon, which is a good development, except that in the Pacific region, if you're India, you're looking at this and saying, if the United States allowed Pakistan to unravel their standing, because the Pakistani role in all this, and I think multiple administrations are guilty of ignoring it, the Pakistani role in enabling the Taliban is ultimately a victory for those pro-Taliban hardliners in the Pakistani government. They have to be looking at this and saying, if the United States could have a third-rate power like Pakistan unravel its aims, what chance do they have of confronting China? So I think this leaves us in a terrible situation, but I go back to the initial point. I don't know how it's possible. If in fact, the people in charge of our foreign policy did not see all of these factors and conclude that there was a very real possibility of a very rapid collapse, then we've got the wrong people making military and diplomacy decisions in our government.
Senator, I'm happy to respond briefly in the time that we have. As you know from your own expertise and leadership on these matters, there are constant assessments being done, and in this particular case, assessments being done of the resilience of Afghan security forces, of the Afghan government, and different scenarios established, from worst case to best case to everything in between. And ultimately, the preponderance of the intelligence and assessments land someplace, and there are always going to be voices, and critically important that we listen to all of them, who may be talking about exclusively the worst case, some best case, some in between. Here's what I can say in this setting. and we can take this up as well in other settings. Back in February, the assessment of the overall assessment of the community was that after a complete U.S. military withdrawal, that could potentially, in the worst case scenario, lead to the Taliban capturing Kabul within a year or two. So that's back in February, and that was more or less where things stood in the winter and into the spring. By July, and you're exactly right, that the situation was deteriorating as the Taliban continued to make progress on the ground throughout the summer. In July, the IC indicated that it was more likely than not that the Taliban would take over by the end of the year, the end of this year. That said, we, the intelligence community, did not say that the countrywide collapse of all meaningful resistance would be likely to occur in a matter of days. And you referenced Chairman Milley, as I did earlier. Nothing that he saw, that I saw, that we saw suggested that this government and security force would collapse in a matter of 11 days. And you're right that I think we need to look back at all of this because, to your point, we collectively, over 20 years, invested extraordinary amounts in those security forces and in that government. Hundreds of billions of dollars, equipment, training, advice, support. And based on that, as well as based on what we were looking at real time, again, we did not see this collapse in a matter of 11 days. But I think it is important that we go back and look at all of this.
The time has expired.
Thank you.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Blinken, for appearing before the committee.
Let's go back across now to our correspondent, Susan Teherani, who has been helping us better understand the ramifications of those statements that have been made there by the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Susan, Antony Blinken saying once again that the Afghan government collapse was not expected is not the best argument to be made here, because that once again raises question marks over American intelligence. But I want to ask you about the Afghans who helped the United States in that war. As of now, any concrete figure that has been put out by the Biden administration as to how many of those still remain in Afghanistan?
So we're hearing various numbers. Again, we're not hearing concrete numbers about, first of all, green card holders, those who are able to come out, SIV visa holders, or individuals who have helped the United States. And there's a reason for that since the beginning of this debacle, and that's because if this administration gives exact numbers, then it's going to be bound by those numbers. And that's one of the main reasons that it's not going to come out and give us exact numbers of how many people are left in Afghanistan. But based on the hearing that we heard yesterday in Congress and what we're seeing develop today at the Senate Foreign Relations during this hearing, it's clear that this is something that's going to be ongoing. There are individuals who are stranded waiting to get out of Afghanistan. They are in danger, and this administration, whether or not they're going to get them out or not, is yet to be seen.
Right. The senator there also touching upon the role played by Pakistan, and the response that was given out by Antony Blinken leaves a lot more to be explained.
Absolutely, and I think it's very important that the issue of Pakistan was brought up, and also India was also brought into the discussion, because ultimately you can see that policymakers and the Republicans right now are concerned on how this over-the-horizon counterterrorism method is going to play out, considering the fact that there are not boots on the ground. And yesterday, Antony Blinken pointed to the fact that he's in close contact with India to try to mitigate this over-the-horizon capability, counterterrorism capability, moving forward. So I think that was a noteworthy issue. And another noteworthy issue that he just brought up was also the fact that, these individuals, these Republicans, are hammering out at the way this evacuation was carried out, the manner that, the failure of this administration. And Antony Blinken was very sly in saying, yes, mistakes were made, but we have to look at the mistakes that were made in the past 20 years. So he sort of pulled it back to the last 2 decades, as opposed to putting the blame exactly on what's happening now, the crisis that we're in right now with the different variations, Pakistan, the individuals stranded in Afghanistan, and the debacle that we're facing with counterterrorism efforts that are murky right now moving forward.
Indeed. We are leaving it there for the moment. Susan Tehrani, appreciate very much joining us on the broadcast with those inputs. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.